Picture this. You're not a chef. You're not even a cook. You're washing dishes. Someone hands you a stack of pans taller than your arms can hold, and you start again. They pay you $16 an hour. Do the math for a second. 52 weeks, 40 hours. That's about $33,000 a year, before taxes, before rent, before anything else life decides to throw at you. And if all you ever sell is your hours, that's it. That's the ceiling. $1 million doesn't just feel far away. It feels like a joke someone tells about a completely different life. But somewhere, on a kitchen almost exactly like this one person started with almost nothing and built something that could never be measured by an hourly wage again. We're not going to tell you who yet. Just watch what happens to the skill. Hey, it's Nick. Quick pause before we jump back in. Every video on this channel starts the same way, with a number that feels too small to matter, $16 an hour. That's not a real biography detail. It's your starting point. The thing most of us can actually picture, because a lot of us have lived some version of it. What you're about to watch is a real story about a real, very famous person. We're not naming him until the end, because I want you sitting with the same question I had the first time I read about his life. How does someone go from washing dishes to running two of the most decorated restaurants in the history of American food? One more thing before we continue. This video uses animated recreations of real events, so some of what you're seeing is stylized, not archival footage. The facts, though, are pulled directly from verified biographies, interviews, and official records. If you've ever felt like your paycheck was a ceiling you couldn't get past, stay to the end. This one might change how you think about that ceiling completely. Also, if you're new here, hit like and drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I'll answer your questions myself. Subscribe too, so you don't miss videos like this one. And if you want something else you'll probably enjoy right after this, check the video in the top right corner. Alright, back to the kitchen. Let's go back further than the dish pit you're standing in right now. You grew up the youngest of 5 brothers, raised by a single mother in a small town in Florida. Money was never something anyone sat you down and explained. It was just something that ran out before the month did. At the dinner table, you learned a lesson without anyone saying it out loud. You ate what was left after your older brothers were finished. They were bigger. They were louder. They got there first. Your mother worked nights, managing the restaurant at a local yacht club. And when you turned 18, she did something that would end up shaping the rest of your life. She put you to work in that same kitchen, not as a favor, because the dishes needed washing, and you were available. You didn't fall in love with cooking that first month. It happened slower than that, watching the line cooks move, watching a sauce come together out of nothing, realizing that heat and time and attention could turn almost nothing into something worth eating. You started finding reasons to stand a little closer to the stove. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about building wealth from a job like this one. It doesn't start with a business plan. It starts with paying closer attention than the job actually requires. You keep moving. Summer season's cooking in Rhode Island. A small, serious French restaurant upstate in New York, where the chef running the kitchen treats food like a discipline, not a paycheck. You spend 3 years there, building a smokehouse by hand, learning to use every part of an animal, learning that most people who call themselves cooks were never actually taught anything at all. And then, in your late 20s, you do something that makes no financial sense whatsoever. You go to France, not to open a restaurant, not to make money, to work for free or close to it, in kitchens that don't know your name. Kitchens with Michelin stars and zero patience for anyone who isn't excellent. You are not getting richer during this part of the story. If anything, you're getting poorer, but you're getting better. And better, it turns out, is the only currency that eventually converts into everything else. By the time you come home, something has changed. You're not the 18-year-old with dish-pruned hands anymore. You're a chef people have started to talk about. And in 1986, you get the thing you've wanted since you were washing pots in Florida. Your own restaurant. It's called Raquel, tucked into Lower Manhattan, and it's yours. Your name on the lease, your food on the plates, nobody left to answer to. The reviews come in strong. Real praise from serious critics. A Wall Street crowd fills your dining room every night, ordering food that reflects everything you spent years learning in France. For a moment, it genuinely feels like the story is already over. Dishwasher to owner, ceiling broken. Except it isn't over. It's barely started. In October of 1987, the stock market crashes. The same Wall Street crowd that filled your tables stops spending the way they used to. Reservations that used to book weeks out start opening up overnight. The kind of food you love making, the kind that takes real time and real cost, becomes harder and harder to justify on a menu people are suddenly nervous to order from. But here's the part that matters more than the market ever did. You don't adjust. You don't simplify the menu, cut the costs, chase what's easier to sell. Something in you refuses to compromise the cooking, because by this point, the cooking isn't just your job anymore. It's proof. Proof that the kid who ate leftovers is actually somebody. And that need to prove it over and over, no matter what it costs, is quietly becoming the most expensive ingredient in the kitchen. By 1990, Rockall is done. Your first restaurant, the one that was supposed to be the ending, closes its doors. You don't know it yet, but this failure is about to become the most important thing that ever happens to your career. The next few years don't look like a success story. They look like someone trying to stay afloat. You consult for other restaurants that aren't yours. You take an executive chef job at a hotel in Los Angeles, cooking someone else's vision instead of your own. You start a small olive oil brand on the side, just to bring in something extra. None of it is the dream. All of it is rent. In the spring of 1992, on a trip north of San Francisco, you walk into a small stone building in a quiet town called Yountville. It used to be a saloon, then a laundry. Then, for 17 years, a modest restaurant run by a husband and wife who are finally ready to sell. You know almost instantly, this is it, this is the building. There's just one problem, you don't have the money, not close to it. Your credit cards are maxed out from keeping yourself afloat since Rockall closed. You're a chef with a real reputation, a failed restaurant behind you, and a building in front of you that you cannot afford. For most people, that's exactly where the story quietly ends. A near miss, a building somebody else eventually buys. But you don't walk away. You start doing something that has nothing to do with cooking and everything to do with what you actually have left. Your reputation. If you can't pay for this building with money you don't have, maybe you can pay for it with the trust you've spent your entire career building. That trust is about to be tested by more than 50 strangers, which leaves the only question that actually matters right now. How do you buy something when you don't have the money to buy anything? You start making calls, not investment pitches, conversations. People who ate at Rockall before it closed. People who watched you cook in France and never forgot it. People who don't fully understand what you're trying to build, but trust that if you're the one building it, it's worth the risk. It takes 19 months. 19 months of meetings in living rooms and diners, describing a restaurant that doesn't exist yet, in a small town most of these investors have never even heard of. 19 months of hearing no. Or worse, hearing nothing at all. Slowly, it adds up. More than 50 investors, most of them writing checks far smaller than you'd expect. Not because they're wealthy, but because they believe in you specifically. Add bank financing on top of that, and by 1994, you finally have what you need. $1.2 million and the deed to a small stone building in Yountville, California. On May 1st, 1994, you sign the papers. The couple who ran the restaurant for 17 years before you hand over the keys. You are no longer a chef with a good resume and a closed restaurant behind you. You are, for the first time in your life, the owner of exactly the thing you set out to build. This should be the part where everything finally gets easier. It is not. You open the doors on July 6th, 1994, and it goes wrong almost immediately. The kitchen isn't finished the way a professional kitchen needs to be. You're short on the basic tools a real restaurant kitchen runs on. A skeleton crew is cooking food that demands precision, in a space that isn't ready to give them any of it. Later, you'll describe that first night simply. A disaster. Orders come in faster than the kitchen can move. Dishes go out late, or wrong, or not at all. Every mistake you've spent your whole career trying to eliminate happens in front of paying customers, on the single night you've been building toward for 2 straight years. You built a smokehouse by hand. You trained in some of the best kitchens in France. You survived your first restaurant's collapse. None of it prepared you for how badly one night can go. Here's the part where most people would have stopped the story, because most people would have quit. You don't. The next morning, you're back in that kitchen. And the morning after that. For weeks, you and your small team don't finish prepping the next day's menu until 3 in the morning. There's no single moment where the restaurant suddenly becomes a success. It's slower than that, and a lot less cinematic. Regulars start coming back. The kitchen starts running the way it should have from day one. Then, in 1995, a well-known San Francisco newspaper columnist writes about a meal he can't stop thinking about at a small restaurant in Yountville. That single piece of writing does something $1.2 million couldn't buy on its own. It tells people where to look. You bought an asset. Now, finally, you're making it work. Here's where the story stops being about survival and starts being about something else entirely. Because once the French Laundry is running, really running, booked out, respected, written about, you don't stop there. You do something most chefs in your position never do. you start building more than one thing. In 1998, you opened Bouchon, just down the street, a different kind of restaurant. French bistro food, more accessible, still built on the same obsessive standards, but designed to run without you standing over every single plate. Then comes a bakery. Then Ad Hoc, a casual spot serving one family-style menu every night. Each one is its own business, run by a system you built, not just a kitchen you personally control. In 2004, you opened Per Se in New York City, the same city where Raquel failed almost 15 years earlier. Except this time, you're not just the chef standing at the pass. You're the owner of a restaurant group with multiple locations, multiple income streams, and a reputation that now works for you even when you're not in the room. The following year, Per Se earns 3 Michelin stars, and when the Michelin Guide arrives in the San Francisco Bay Area for the first time, the French Laundry receives 3 stars as well, a rating it has held on to every single year since. Sit with what that actually means for a second. 1 chef, 2 restaurants, 2 different cities, both holding the highest rating a restaurant can receive at the same time. No American chef had ever done that before. Notice what didn't happen, though. You didn't get here by cooking more hours. There are only so many hours in a day, and you'd already been working nearly all of them since you were 18 years old, standing over a sink full of dirty pans. Hours alone were never going to be the mechanism. Something else was. Let's go back to the real question. Not, how did he make $1 million? That's the wrong way to even ask it. The real question is, how did a paycheck stop being his ceiling? Here's the honest answer, and it's simpler than you'd expect. First, you get paid for your hours. That's the dish pit. That's most jobs, most people, most of a lifetime for most workers. Then, if you get good enough, you start getting paid for what you know. That's the France years. Almost no money, but a skill quietly becoming worth more than a wage. Then, eventually, if you're patient and a little reckless, you start owning the thing that makes the money, instead of just working inside it. That's Raquel, even though it failed. That's the French Laundry, even after the worst opening night of your life. And then, if it works, if you survive the failure, rebuild the trust, and the thing you own actually starts to run, you build a system. Something bigger than any one kitchen, any one night, any one you. Hours, skill, ownership, system. That's not a story about a lucky chef. That's a blueprint. And it starts in the exact same place you're standing in right now. So, who have you been this entire time? Your name is Thomas Keller. You started washing dishes at 18 years old, in a restaurant your own mother managed, because she needed the help and you needed the job. You became a cook almost by accident, then a chef on purpose. You trained in kitchens in France that paid you almost nothing and taught you almost everything. You opened your first restaurant, Raquel, in 1986, and watched it close 4 years later, when the world around it changed and you refused to change with it. You were nearly out of money. Then you found an old stone building in a small California town and spent 19 months convincing more than 50 people to believe in something that didn't exist yet. Your first night in that building was a disaster you'd talk about for the rest of your life, and you kept going anyway. Today, the French Laundry and Per Se both hold 3 Michelin stars. At the same time, in 2 different cities. You're the only American chef to ever pull that off. We're not going to give you a net worth tonight. Some numbers aren't ours to guess at, and honestly, they were never the point. Here's the point. He didn't turn $16 an hour into $1 million. He turned a skill into a reputation into ownership, and ownership into a system that could stand on its own. That's how a paycheck stops being a ceiling. If you've been washing dishes, literally, or just in whatever version of that job you're stuck in right now, that ceiling isn't permanent. It's just the first ingredient.